They all thought Liz Jackson was at home crying. In reality, she was buying a $50,000 gown and hiring Sydney's best private investigator. The young woman in the scarlet-red dress hanging off David Miller's arm at the Imperial Club didn't know three critical things. First, that Liz had orchestrated every single detail to ensure she was there tonight. Second, that the USB stick in Liz's Hermes bag contained photos of her with two other married men over the last 6 months. And third, and most importantly, that in 30 minutes she would be leaving this ball in tears, while Liz would become a legend the Sydney high society would be talking about for the next 50 years. David thought he was trading a boring wife for a luxury plaything. Chloe thought she was winning a fairy tale prince. Neither of them had any idea they had just awoken a queen. And queens don't forgive, they destroy with style. The September night at the Imperial Club was thick with ostentation and deceit. Baccarat crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the main ballroom, where the crème de la crème of Sydney's society gathered for the annual Hope Foundation charity ball. The air conditioning kept the room at a perfect temperature, in stark contrast to the suffocating heat of hypocrisy that hung among the guests. David Miller adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt for the third time in 5 minutes. At 38, the real estate mogul had built an empire that guaranteed him a constant presence in the social columns. But tonight, he felt particularly anxious. Not because of the event's importance, after all, he had attended dozens of similar balls, but because of the company he had chosen to bring. Chloe Henderson glided through the ballroom as if she owned the place. At 29, the young woman flaunted an artificial but striking beauty. Her platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her bare shoulders, accentuated by a scarlet-red Valentino dress that David had bought especially for the occasion. The generous neckline and the fabric that hugged every curve of her body did not go unnoticed by the male gazes or the whispered comments of the socialite ladies. "David, darling!" The shrill voice of Margaret Wilson, wife of a federal MP, cut through the air like a knife. "What a surprise to see you here, and with company!" Her eyes travelled over Chloe from top to bottom, a predatory analysis disguised as social politeness. "Margaret, always a pleasure." David forced a smile as he felt small beads of sweat form on his forehead. "This is Chloe Henderson, my special consultant." Chloe laughed, a crystalline sound that echoed through the room. "Consultant? How modest, my love." Her blood-red nails caressed David's arm possessively. "We're much more intimate than that, aren't we?" David's discomfort was palpable, but Chloe seemed to feed on the situation. She had spent months planning this moment, the night she would finally be introduced to society as David Miller's new woman. In her young, ambitious mind, this was her official coronation. His legitimate wife, Liz, had become a ghost-like figure in their conversations, a woman who preferred discretion to the limelight, and that, to Chloe, was a sign of weakness. "Where is Mrs. Miller?" Margaret's question was asked with the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where to poke to cause pain. "I haven't seen her at any social events in a while." David swallowed hard. "Liz has been busy with personal projects." "What a shame," Margaret murmured, though her tone suggested the exact opposite. "She was such an elegant woman. She always knew how to behave with class." The word "was" hung in the air like a death sentence. Chloe felt a pang of irritation. Why did everyone keep comparing her to that boring woman? David had told her that Liz was dull, unadventurous, a wife who was content to stay at home reading books instead of accompanying him to important events. For Chloe, that only proved that some women were born to shine, while others were born to disappear. "David, I need to talk to you about the Marina project," interrupted Rick Mendoza, one of the company's minor partners. The relief on David's face was instantaneous. While the men moved away to discuss business, Chloe remained alone in the center of the ballroom, feeling like a queen on her throne. The flashes of social photographers found her constantly, and she knew her photos would be splashed across the gossip magazines the following week. David Miller's new flame, the businessman with a stunning companion. She could already imagine the headlines. The champagne flowed freely among the guests, and Chloe did not hold back. With every sip, she felt more confident, more in control of the situation. She approached a group of socialites she knew superficially from the salons and gyms of the eastern suburbs. "Chloe, what a stunning dress," commented Patricia Alvarenga, a magistrate's wife. "Valentino?" "A gift from David," Chloe replied, emphasizing the intimacy. "He has exquisite taste in women's clothing." The women exchanged knowing glances. They all knew what that meant. David Miller was publicly flaunting his mistress, a behavior that, while not uncommon in these circles, still caused a stir when done so blatantly. "So, how are you adapting to your new position?" Patricia's question had a double meaning, and they all laughed discreetly. "Perfectly," Chloe replied, raising her chin. "I've always felt more comfortable in this environment than certain people who isolate themselves at home." The malicious comment about Liz did not go unnoticed. The women present knew the unwritten code of high society well. When a wife stopped appearing at events, it usually meant she had lost the battle to a younger, more ambitious rival. Across the room, David tried to focus on the business conversation, but his eyes constantly wandered to Chloe. Part of him felt proud to be with a woman so young and attractive. It was a confirmation of his virility and success. Another part, however, began to question the wisdom of so openly exposing his extramarital affair. "She's a looker," Rick commented, following David's gaze. "But don't you think it's risky bringing the friend to an event of this caliber?" "Chloe isn't just a friend," David retorted, more defensively than he intended. "We have a serious relationship." "Serious?" Rick raised an eyebrow. "And your wife knows about this?" David looked away. Liz knew, of course. How could she not? The rumors had been circulating for months, and he didn't even bother to be discreet. But Liz, true to her reserved nature, had not made a scene or any threats. She had simply become even more reclusive, which David interpreted as a tacit acceptance of the new situation. "Liz understands that our marriage has evolved into something different," he mumbled, sipping his scotch. In reality, David had married Liz Jackson 15 years ago for practical reasons. She came from a traditional family with important connections in the judiciary and politics, connections that were crucial for the growth of his business. Liz was smart, cultured, a perfect wife on paper. But as the years went by, David began to see her as part of the furniture, always there, always reliable, but without the sparkle and excitement he had started to seek elsewhere. Chloe represented everything his wife was not: spontaneous, sensual, impressionable. When he met her at a law firm party where she worked as a receptionist, he was immediately attracted to her youth and her hunger for social climbing. It was easy to impress her with expensive dinners and lavish gifts. It was easy to be the hero in the life of someone who came from a 2-bedroom apartment in Bondi. "David!" Chloe's voice called him back to the present. She was approaching with a radiant smile, followed by a man younger than him, whom he recognized as Julian Ford, heir to one of the country's largest fortunes. "Julian was just telling me about the new art collection he recently acquired," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Picassos, Van Goghs, it's fascinating." David felt a pang of irritation. Chloe was clearly flirting, and Julian, known for his reputation as a ladies' man, seemed eager to reciprocate. It was humiliating to have to compete for his own mistress's attention in public. "Chloe, we need to talk to the event organizers," he interrupted, grabbing her arm. "But David, Julian was inviting me to see his private gallery," she pouted. "Another time," David replied curtly, guiding her away from the young heir. As they walked through the ballroom, Chloe murmured in his ear, "You don't need to be jealous, honey. You know you're the only man in my life." The words should have reassured him, but David felt a growing unease. There was something about Chloe's attitude tonight, an excessive confidence, a presumption that her place was guaranteed, that deeply bothered him. Near the main table, where the event organizers and some important politicians were gathered, David spotted Carlos Drummond, an influential social journalist. The man was watching them with obvious interest, already mentally drafting the article that would appear in the column the next day. "David Miller, long time no see." Carlos approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And this beautiful young lady must be Mrs. Miller?" The silence that followed was deafening. David felt his face flush, while Chloe, far from feeling uncomfortable, smiled even more widely. "Not yet," she replied with a giggle. "But who knows? Maybe soon." The insinuation was crystal clear. Chloe wasn't content with just being the mistress. She had bigger plans, and she was announcing those plans to one of the most dangerous gossips in the city. David forced a nervous laugh. "Carlos, this is Chloe Henderson." "Chloe, Carlos is one of the most respected journalists in Sydney." "It's a huge pleasure," Carlos said, kissing Chloe's hand with exaggerated gallantry. "I imagine we'll have much to talk about in the coming times." The veiled threat was not lost on David. Carlos Drummond had the power to make or break reputations with a single column. If he decided to turn the situation into a scandal, the consequences could be devastating, not just for his public image, but for his business. As they talked, the ballroom continued to fill up. Influential politicians greeted businessmen. Socialites showed off their latest jewelry and couture, and the orchestra played classic waltzes that created a perfect soundtrack for this theatre of appearances. Chloe was in her element. She greeted acquaintances, posed for photos, and chatted with important people as if she were, in fact, Mrs. Miller. Her every gesture was calculated to solidify her position, to make it clear that she was not just a fleeting affair, but the new reality in David's life. But in the back of her ambitious mind, Chloe couldn't completely ignore the whispers she heard when she passed. Where is Liz Jackson? What an awkward situation. Poor Liz, she was always such a distinguished lady. Why did everyone insist on talking about that woman? Chloe had never met her in person. David always said that Liz preferred to avoid conflict and confrontation. To her, that only confirmed her superiority. While Liz was hiding at home, she was shining in the high society ballrooms. What Chloe didn't know was that at that exact moment, just a few blocks away, Liz Jackson was meticulously preparing for her own entrance at the Imperial Club. And when she arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. Liz Jackson stood in front of the full-length mirror in her walk-in wardrobe, observing her own image with the cold, analytical detachment of a general planning a battle. At 35, she possessed a mature and sophisticated beauty that contrasted dramatically with her rival's youthful and obvious appeal. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, framing a face with classic features that didn't need heavy makeup to make an impact. The dress she had chosen for the night was a masterpiece of French haute couture, an impeccable black Chanel with pearl details that ran along the discreet yet elegant neckline. The piece had cost more than many cars, but it wasn't the price that made it special. It was what it represented. Power, class, legitimacy, everything that Chloe Henderson was trying to buy with money borrowed from another woman's husband. Liz knew exactly what was happening at the Imperial Club at that moment. She had received no less than 15 calls from worried friends throughout the week, each of them eager to be the first to tell her about the public humiliation David was inflicting on her. What none of them knew was that Liz had orchestrated every detail of this situation. "Ma'am," "The car is here," announced Connie, her housekeeper of over a decade, appearing at the wardrobe door. The middle-aged woman looked at Liz with equal parts admiration and concern. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Liz smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown in months. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Connie." The truth was that Liz had discovered David's betrayal long before any social gossip, not because she was particularly perceptive, but because David was embarrassingly careless. Receipts for expensive dinners for two when he was supposedly in business meetings, charges for jewelry and dresses on his corporate card, a woman's perfume on his clothes that was definitely not hers. For the first few months, Liz had felt the familiar pain of betrayal, the bruised ego, the feeling of inadequacy, the questioning of where she had failed as a wife. But then, on a particularly melancholy Tuesday afternoon, something changed. She was looking through a wedding photo album when she came across a picture of herself on their wedding day. In that photo, she radiated a light that had been lost over the years of their marriage. It was in that moment that Liz understood a liberating truth. She hadn't lost David to Chloe because she had failed as a wife. She had lost David because he had failed as a man. From that epiphany, Liz began to plan. Not a vulgar, emotional revenge, but a cold, surgical strategy that would not only expose the couple's farce, but also guarantee her the freedom she had unconsciously desired for years. Over the next 6 months, Liz watched. She discreetly hired a private investigator, not to confirm the betrayal she already knew about, but to meticulously document it. Photographs, videos, hotel records, even recordings of compromising conversations that David and Chloe held in public places, believing they were safe in the bubble of arrogance they had created. More importantly, Liz used that time to reorganize her finances. David had always assumed she was financially dependent on him, a sexist and ignorant assumption. In reality, Liz had inherited a considerable fortune from her paternal grandmother, investments in real estate and stocks that she managed personally without involving her husband. In addition, she had her own art consulting business that generated much more than David could have ever imagined. During her months of absence from social events, Liz had also dedicated herself to herself in a way she hadn't in years. A personal trainer 3 times a week, regular aesthetic treatments, a complete wardrobe overhaul. Not to win David back. That bridge had been irreversibly burned, but for herself. That specific night, Liz had chosen the Hope Foundation charity ball for precise strategic reasons. It was an event that brought together the core of Sydney's elite, people who had known her family for decades and who respected her lineage and class. It was also an environment where unwritten social rules worked in her favor. As much as they tolerated male excesses in private, the public exposure of a marital betrayal was still seen as a tasteless act that had to be punished. More crucially, Liz knew David would bring Chloe to the ball. It was she herself who, through a mutual friend, had planted the idea in the ambitious young mistress's head. The Hope Foundation ball is the most important event of the year, she had strategically commented during a lunch. It's where society truly shows itself. Liz's private driver, Jean-Claude, was waiting for her at the building's entrance. He was a discreet and loyal man who had worked for the Jackson family for nearly 20 years. He knew all the secrets, all the nuances of Liz's life, and his discretion was absolute. "Good evening, Mrs. Jackson," he greeted her, opening the door of the black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. "You look radiant tonight." "Thank you, Jean-Claude. To the Imperial Club." During the 30-minute drive, Liz mentally went over every detail of her plan. She had timed her arrival for the exact moment the ball was at its peak, when all the important guests were already present, when the social photographers were most active, when David and Chloe were at their most relaxed, and confident. Liz's phone vibrated with a message from Elaine Carter, a magistrate's wife and one of her oldest friends. "My love, they are making a shameful display of themselves. She's practically announcing herself as your replacement. Come soon and put an end to this farce." Liz smiled as she read the message. Elaine had always been her fiercest ally, a woman of the old guard who firmly believed that certain traditions and social hierarchies had to be respected. To Elaine, Chloe was nothing more than a classless social climber trying to occupy a place that didn't belong to her. Other messages followed, all from outraged friends, recounting David and Chloe's behavior. "She's wearing a red Valentino, completely inappropriate for a charity event," wrote Patricia Alvarenga. "He introduced her as a special consultant, but she corrected him by saying they were much more intimate," added Margaret Wilson. Each message confirmed that Liz's plan was working perfectly. David and Chloe were digging their own graves with an almost comical relish. Liz thought about her life with David during the first years of their marriage. She had genuinely tried to be a good wife, supporting him in business, accompanying him to social events, keeping the house immaculate, being the perfect partner for every occasion. But David always seemed to see her as an expensive, well-behaved accessory, not as a true partner. As the years passed, she realized that David had chosen her not for love, but for social convenience. She brought respectability, family connections, and an image of an ideal wife that complemented his business ambitions. In return, he offered her financial security and social status, a commercial transaction disguised as romance. Liz's awakening to this reality was gradual, but irreversible. She began to notice how David ignored her during conversations at social events, how he interrupted her when she expressed opinions, how he assumed his own decisions were automatically correct without consulting her perspective. Small humiliations that accumulated over the years to form an unbearable weight. When she discovered the betrayal, Liz initially felt devastated, but as she watched David's behavior with Chloe, the way he melted at her feigned naivete, how important he felt mentoring the ambitious young woman, she realized that she hadn't lost a true love. She had been freed from a burden. "We're arriving, Mrs. Jackson," Jean-Claude announced, interrupting her reflections. Liz looked out the window and saw the golden lights of the Imperial Club shining in the night. Dozens of luxury cars were parked at the entrance, while paparazzi and social photographers awaited the arrival of important personalities. The red carpet stretched from the pavement to the main door, bordered by lush floral arrangements. "Jean-Claude, give me 5 more minutes," Liz requested. "I want my entrance to be memorable." She opened her Hermès bag and checked the contents one last time. In addition to the usual items, lipstick, compact powder, wallet, there was a discreet USB stick containing all the documents and evidence she had collected on David and Chloe. She didn't plan to use it tonight, but it was always good to have an ace up her sleeve. Liz also carried something much more powerful than any physical evidence: the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. For 15 years, she had been the perfect, discreet wife who solved problems without making waves. Tonight, she would be the exact opposite. Her phone vibrated one more time. It was a message from Carlos Drummond, the social journalist. "Liz, darling, I hear you're coming to the ball. How wonderful. I've missed your elegance at these events. See you inside." Perfect. Carlos was clearly setting the stage for an epic confrontation between wife and mistress. Like all good gossip journalists, he could smell the drama in the air, and he wanted to make sure he had a front-row seat when everything exploded. "Now, Jean-Claude, it's showtime." The driver smiled in the rearview mirror. He had watched Liz grow from a timid young woman into a powerful one, and he knew that tonight would be historic. When the Mercedes stopped in front of the Imperial Club, a murmur spread among the photographers. Liz Jackson had become a mysterious figure in recent months. Her absence from social events had generated speculation and conspiracy theories. Now, her reappearance promised answers. Jean-Claude got out of the car and walked calmly to the back door. The silence was almost palpable. Even the most experienced paparazzi knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. When the door opened and Liz stepped onto the red carpet, there was a moment of suspended time. She was radiant in a way no one remembered seeing her before. More confident, more imposing, more genuinely powerful. The flashes went off in a frantic sequence as Liz walked slowly towards the entrance. Every step was calculated, every movement a statement. She greeted the photographers with graceful gestures, but did not stop for interviews. There was more important work to be done. At the club entrance, the doorman received her with an almost feudal bow. "Mrs. Miller, what an honor to have you back with us." "The pleasure is all mine, Robert. A beautiful night, isn't it?" As she walked through the club's corridors towards the main ballroom, Liz could hear the murmur of the crowd inside. Music, laughter, lively conversations, the sound of people who had no idea their lives were about to be turned upside down. She stopped in front of the ballroom's double doors, adjusted her pearl necklace one last time, and took a deep breath. On the other side of those doors were David and Chloe, probably still reveling in the attention they were receiving, still believing they had conquered something important. They had no idea that the real queen had arrived to claim her throne. The Imperial Club ballroom was in full swing when Liz Jackson made her entrance. The orchestra was playing a Strauss waltz. Couples danced elegantly in the center of the room, and the buzz of conversations created a symphony of well-behaved civility. The crystal chandeliers cast golden light on the evening gowns and impeccable tuxedos, creating an atmosphere of refined opulence. David was near the bar, laughing loudly at a joke Rick Mendoza had just told, when the first whisper reached his ears. Liz arrived. The smile froze on his face. He turned slowly, searching the crowd for his wife's familiar figure, but failed to locate her. A part of his brain still hoped it was a rumor, that someone had mistaken a brunette in a black dress for Liz. "David!" Elaine Carter's voice sounded behind him like the harbinger of a storm. "Your wife looks stunning tonight." He turned and saw Elaine with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile that women of high society use when they are about to witness the public humiliation of someone they consider deserving. It was then that he saw her. Liz was entering the main ballroom with the serenity of a queen returning to her palace after a long exile. There was something different about her, an aura of power and self-confidence that David did not remember ever seeing before. The black Chanel dress hugged her silhouette with mathematical elegance. The pearls at her neck caught the light in a hypnotic way, and her brown hair shone like polished silk. But the most impressive thing was her posture. Liz didn't walk, she glided. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. And wherever she went, conversations ceased, heads turned, and a respectful silence spread like ripples on a lake. David felt his mouth go dry. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen Liz command a room like that. It was as if she had transformed from a supporting character into the lead in her own life. Across the room, Chloe was telling an anecdote to a group of businessmen's wives when she noticed her audience had become distracted. They were all staring intently at something or someone behind her. "What's going on?" she asked, turning to follow the direction of their gazes. And then she saw her too. Chloe had imagined many times what her first encounter with David's legitimate wife would be like. In her fantasies, Liz would be a boring woman, visibly aged, clearly inferior in every way that mattered. The reality was a brutal shock. The woman walking towards her radiated a natural elegance that no amount of money could buy. There was something almost aristocratic about her posture, an innate class that suddenly made Chloe feel like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Liz greeted the guests with the perfect grace of someone who was born for this world. A kiss on Margaret Wilson's cheek, a warm handshake with the federal MP, a kind word for the magistrate's wife. Each interaction reaffirmed her position in the social hierarchy, not as the betrayed wife seeking sympathy, but as the great lady returning to her rightful place. "Liz, darling!" Patricia Alvarenga's voice cut through the air like a crystal bell. The magistrate's wife approached with open arms, clearly thrilled to see her friend after months of absence. "What a joy to have you back! I've missed you so much!" The hug between the two women was warm and genuine, in stark contrast to the artificial displays of affection that characterized most of the interactions in that environment. Chloe watched the scene with growing discomfort, realizing for the first time that Liz was not just David's wife. She was a respected and beloved figure in her own right in this society. "Patricia, you're radiant as ever," Liz replied, her melodious voice carrying a tone of genuine affection. "How are you, Robert? I heard the nomination for the High Court was confirmed." Yes, we're very happy. But tell me about you. Where have you been hiding all these months? We missed you so much." Liz smiled with a mysterious elegance. "I've been taking care of some personal matters. Sometimes a woman needs time to reorganize her priorities." The answer was diplomatically vague, but loaded with undertones that were not lost on the women present. They all knew about the situation with David and Chloe, and now they were beginning to understand that Liz's absence from social events had not been due to humiliation or despair, but to strategy. While Liz talked, David remained paralyzed near the bar. Part of him wanted to approach, greet her as if nothing had changed, and maintain the facade of a harmonious marriage they had always presented in public. Another part, the cowardly and guilty part, just wanted to disappear. The decision was made by Chloe. The young woman, driven by a toxic mixture of jealousy, insecurity, and youthful arrogance, decided that she would not be overshadowed by an older woman, no matter how elegant she was. After all, she was the one with David now. She was the one wearing the expensive gifts, the one occupying his bed, the one with plans for a future with him. "David," she whispered, pulling him by the arm, "let's go and greet your wife. It's the polite thing to do." David swallowed hard. "Chloe, maybe now isn't the best time." "Nonsense," she replied, already walking towards the group around Liz. "We're all civilized adults here." Chloe didn't realize she was about to make the most catastrophic mistake of her young life. In her limited mind, this would be the moment of her official coronation, when she would introduce herself as David's new woman in front of his previous wife, permanently establishing the new hierarchical order. Liz saw the couple's approach long before they got close. Her eyes met David's for a brief moment, and he visibly cringed under her gaze. It was as if she could see right through him, perceiving all the guilt, all the discomfort, all the cowardice he carried. Liz forced a smile as he reached the group. His voice came out higher than he intended. "What? What a surprise to see you here." The silence that followed was deafening. All the nearby conversations ceased. All eyes turned to the trio, and even the orchestra seemed to lower its volume, as if the musicians also wanted to hear what would happen next. Liz looked at David for a long moment, her expression perfectly serene. When she finally spoke, her voice had the cutting coldness of tempered steel. "David, what an interesting coincidence." She paused, a calculated move, allowing his discomfort to intensify. "I thought you were in Melbourne this week. An important meeting with investors. Wasn't that what you said?" The lie was exposed with surgical elegance. David had invented that excuse to explain his absence from home in recent days, when he was actually in a luxury hotel with Chloe, preparing for the ball. Now, Confronted with his own dishonesty in public, he stammered, The meeting was cancelled at the last minute." "What a shame," Liz murmured, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. "Well, at least you didn't miss such an important event as this one." It was then that Chloe decided to intervene. The young woman, misinterpreting the moment and thinking that Liz was being submissive by not confronting the situation directly, stepped forward with a smile that was meant to be friendly, but came across as condescending. "You must be Liz," she said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured red nails. "I'm Chloe Henderson. I've heard so much about you." The group around them collectively held their breath. It was a moment of palpable tension. Even the most distant guests began to discreetly approach, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Liz looked at Chloe's outstretched hand for a moment that seemed to last forever. Then, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she delicately shook it. "Chloe, yes, I've heard a lot about you too." The phrase was uttered with such elegance that it took a few seconds for Chloe to perceive the venom contained within it. "David told me you work together," Liz continued, her voice maintaining the perfectly polite tone of high society. "Something about consulting on project development?" David opened his mouth to reply, but Chloe interrupted him, clearly anxious to establish her true position. "Oh, we're much more than work colleagues," she giggled, a high-pitched sound that resonated uncomfortably in the silence of the ballroom. "In fact, David and I have a very special relationship." The words came out of her mouth with the confidence of someone who believed she was revealing a truth that would give her power over the situation. Instead, she had just fallen into the most elegant trap ever set at a Sydney social event. Liz tilted her head slightly, as if she were processing some particularly interesting information. "Ah, I see," she said, her voice still holding that deadly courtesy. "How brave of you to make it public like this." The word brave was pronounced in such a way that it sounded exactly like its opposite. Chloe was beginning to realize that something was wrong, but her youth and inexperience didn't allow her to fully decode the nuances of the conversation. David, on the other hand, was as pale as a sheet. He knew Liz well enough to recognize the danger signs, the overly polite tone, the smile that wasn't reflected in her eyes, the upright and controlled posture. She was furious, but expressing that fury through the refined codes of high society, which made her infinitely more dangerous than any emotional outburst. "Liz," he tried to intervene, "maybe we should—" "Oh, David," she interrupted softly. "There's no need for discomfort among civilized people." She turned to Chloe with renewed interest. "Tell me, darling, how long have you two—" "Been working together?" Chloe, misinterpreting the question as an opportunity to establish her supremacy, replied with youthful pride. "About 8 months. David has been a wonderful mentor." "Mentor?" Liz repeated, as if savoring the word. "What an interesting term to describe the relationship." The air in the ballroom was so charged with tension that even the waiters had stopped circulating with the champagne trays. Dozens of eyes were fixed on the trio, and Carlos Drummond, the social journalist, watched everything from a strategic distance, clearly taking mental notes for his column the next day. Elaine Carter approached the group with a smile that promised trouble. "Liz, darling," she said, her voice filled with false innocence. "What a stunning dress! Chanel, isn't it? I've always envied your impeccable taste in fashion." "Thank you, Elaine. You know how it is. Some pieces never go out of style, do they?" The implication was clear. True elegance is timeless, unlike the passing fashion displayed by certain younger people. Chloe, finally beginning to realize she was being subtly attacked, decided to fight back. "Your dress is also beautiful," she said to Liz, her tone trying to sound generous but failing miserably. "Very classic." Must have been terribly expensive. The comment was a grotesque mistake. To suggest that Liz cared about the price of clothes, or worse, that she needed to justify her spending, was a display of classlessness that made several women present gasp in shock. Liz smiled, this time a truly dangerous smile. "Darling," she said, her voice as soft as velvet but as sharp as a razor, "when one truly has class, the price becomes irrelevant. It's something you're either born with or never acquire." The phrase fell on Chloe like a silent bomb. For a moment, the young woman was speechless, slowly processing the fact that she had been publicly outclassed in the most elegant way possible. David tried to intervene again, his voice desperate. "Well, I think we should all—" "David," Liz interrupted him again, this time turning to him with her full attention, "since we're all here gathered in such a casual way, maybe it's a good time to clarify a few things." The entire ballroom seemed to have gone quiet. Even the orchestra had stopped playing, as if the musicians also wanted to hear what would happen next. "Clarifications are always welcome," murmured Elaine Carter, barely able to contain her excitement. Liz adjusted her pearls with deliberately slow movements, like a matador preparing for the final thrust. "You see," she said, her voice now holding a tone of genuine amusement, "there are certain illusions that need to be put to rest before they cause more discomfort than they already have." Chloe felt a chill of panic run down her spine. There was something about Liz's attitude, an absolute confidence, an almost predatory serenity that suggested she knew something important, something that would completely change the game. "I don't understand," Chloe stammered. "Oh, darling," Liz replied, her smile now genuinely radiant. "You will understand. All of you will understand." And it was then that Liz Jackson began to methodically, elegantly, and irreversibly destroy the lives of everyone who had underestimated her power. "David," Liz said, her voice cutting through the silence of the ballroom like glass against glass, "since we're among friends, why don't you tell Chloe about our conversation last night?" David's face paled to a color that rivaled the pearls on his wife's neck. His eyes widened in absolute panic because he hadn't had a single conversation with Liz last night or on any night in recent weeks. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his trembling voice betrayed his nervousness. Liz tilted her head with feigned curiosity, as if she were genuinely surprised by her husband's answer. "You don't? How strange. Perhaps my memory is failing me." She paused theatrically, letting her eyes sweep over the circle of spectators who had formed around them. "Or perhaps you forgot to mention to your mentor that we are still married." The word mentor was pronounced with such irony that several people in the group had to discreetly stifle nervous giggles. Chloe felt the blood rush to her face, finally understanding that she was being publicly ridiculed. "Of course we know you're married," Chloe said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "But marriages evolve, don't they? Sometimes people find happiness in different places." "Ah, yes," Liz agreed with a graceful nod. "Evolution, a fascinating concept." She turned to Elaine Carter with a conspiratorial air. "Elaine, you've been married to Robert for 30 years. Have you experienced that kind of evolution?" Elaine laughed, a crystalline sound filled with aristocratic malice. "Robert knows his place very well." The comment was a direct jab at David's masculinity, suggesting he had failed as a man by not keeping his house in order. Several men present coughed uncomfortably as their wives exchanged approving glances. Margaret Wilson joined the group, clearly not wanting to miss the show. "Liz, it's wonderful to see you at our events again," she said with fake effusiveness. "Your presence always elevates the level of any occasion." "How kind, Margaret. I was just explaining to young Chloe how certain traditions work in our society." Chloe felt more and more cornered. There was something about the way these women spoke, always polite, always elegant, but carrying a subtle venom that she couldn't counter because she didn't master the necessary social codes. "Traditions can be outdated," she said, trying to sound sophisticated. "The modern world allows people to be more authentic in their relationships." The silence that followed was so profound that you could hear the tinkling of the chandelier crystals swaying gently with the breeze from the air conditioner. Liz watched Chloe for a long moment, like a feline studying its prey before the fatal leap. "Authenticity," she repeated slowly. "What a powerful word." "You're right, darling. Authenticity is fundamental." She paused, her smile turning predatory. "Which is precisely why I think it's time to be completely authentic about this situation." David tried to intervene desperately. "Liz, maybe now isn't the place." "Oh, but it's exactly the right place," she interrupted him, her voice still maintaining that deadly courtesy. "After all, this is where you chose to make your association public. It's only fair to clarify a few details for our dear friends." Carlos Drummond had discreetly moved closer, his expression that of a journalist sniffing out the story of the century. Other guests also approached, creating an ever-widening circle around the central trio. "You see," Liz continued, now addressing the audience directly, "dear Chloe believes she won my husband's heart through her youth and authenticity." She paused for dramatic effect. "What she doesn't know is that David has a very specific pattern when it comes to his extramarital adventures." Chloe's eyes widened, suddenly realizing she was about to discover something devastating. "A pattern?" Elaine asked, clearly enjoying herself. "Oh yes, young, ambitious women of humble origin who are easily dazzled by expensive gifts and promises of social climbing." Liz listed the characteristics with the precision of a scientist cataloguing specimens. "In the last 15 years, there have been at least, 6 of them." The number fell on Chloe like a hammer. 6. She wasn't special. She wasn't unique. She was just the latest in a long line of temporary replacements. David was clearly desperate. "Liz, please." "Oh, David, don't be modest," she said with false admiration. "You have a special talent for finding these girls, always with the same profile. Receptionists, secretaries, flight attendants. Impressionable young women who mistake male attention for true love." Patricia Alvarenga could not contain a giggle. "And what happened to the other 5, darling?" "Well," Liz replied, as if she were telling a funny anecdote over afternoon tea, "some were discreetly dismissed when they started making inconvenient demands. Others discovered on their own that they weren't as special as they imagined. 1 or 2 even managed to get advantageous marriages with more available men." Chloe finally understood the full extent of her humiliation. She had gambled all her chips on a man who, she now discovered, was not even half the prize she had imagined. "But the thing is," Liz continued, now speaking directly to Chloe, "you made one mistake none of the others did." "What mistake?" The question came out as a strangled whisper. "You believed you had won." The words fell on Chloe with the weight of a legal sentence. She looked around, seeing for the first time the expressions of the guests. Not admiration or envy, as she had imagined, but pity mixed with aristocratic contempt. "David never told me about the others," she stammered, turning to him in search of denial, of an explanation, of anything that would restore her reality. David could not meet her eyes. His guilt was stamped on his face like a tattoo. "Of course he didn't tell you," Liz said softly. "Why would he? That would ruin the fantasy he creates for each of you. The fantasy that you are special, that you are different, that this time it's true love." Elaine Carter shook her head with theatrical reproach. "Men can be so cruel, can't they? Making these poor girls believe in fairy tales." "The cruelty," Liz said, "is not in having extramarital affairs. Powerful men have always had mistresses. It's almost a tradition. The cruelty is in creating false expectations, in making these women believe they can occupy a place that was never meant for them. Chloe finally exploded. And what place is that? The place of the submissive wife who accepts everything in silence? The entire ballroom held its breath. It was the first time anyone had directly confronted Liz, and everyone wanted to see how she would respond. Liz smiled. Not the elegant, controlled smile she had maintained all night, but a genuine, almost amused smile. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice carrying a mix of pity and condescension. "You really don't understand, do you? You think I'm here as the humiliated wife, trying to win back an unfaithful husband?" She paused, letting her eyes sweep over all the faces around her. "I didn't come here to fight for David. I came to give him back to you." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the sound of the waiter's shoes on the marble could be heard. "Give back?" Chloe repeated, confused. "Yes, darling, you can have him." Liz made an elegant gesture with her hand, as if she were handing over a not-so-desirable gift. "In fact, I insist you keep him. After all, you both deserve each other." David finally found his voice. "Liz, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about freedom, David. Yours and mine." She opened her Hermes bag and took out a sealed envelope. "The divorce papers were filed yesterday. You should receive the official notification on Monday." The envelope passed from hand to hand, like a grenade with the pin pulled. David held it with trembling fingers, his face expressing absolute shock. But we didn't even talk about this." "We did talk about it. For 8 months, David. Every time you came home smelling of another woman's perfume, every time you lied about where you had been, every time you treated me like a piece of furniture that decorates the house but doesn't participate in the life that happens inside it." Liz's voice remained serene, but there was tempered steel in every word. "The conversation was long and one-sided, but it happened." Chloe looked at David, hoping he would protest, that he would declare his love for her, that he would confirm the plans for the future they had made together. Instead, he stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. "How much do you want?" was the first thing he managed to say. The question revealed so much about his character that several women present made poorly disguised expressions of disgust. "Oh, David," Liz said, shaking her head with fake sadness, "always reducing everything to money. I don't want your money, darling. I have my own." "Your own?" "Yes. Grandmother Beatrice's inheritance, which you always assumed was insignificant because it was just little woman things, like real estate and stocks. It's actually worth more than your company." She smiled. "Much more." The shock on David's face was comical. For 15 years, he had assumed he was the sole provider for the family, the only one with significant resources. To discover that his wife was not only financially independent but potentially richer than he was a devastating blow to his male ego. "Besides," Liz continued casually, "my art consulting business grew quite a bit in recent years. International clients, you know, people who value authenticity and expertise." Chloe finally understood the full extent of her humiliation. She had gambled all her chips on a man who she now discovered was not even half the prize she had imagined. So, you're giving us your blessing," she stammered, trying to find some thread of dignity to cling to. "Oh, darling, it's not exactly a blessing," Liz replied with deadly gentleness. "It's more like returning a defective product to the store." The phrase echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Several people laughed openly, unable to contain their reaction to the brutal elegance of the response. David finally exploded. "Liz, you can't humiliate me like this in public." "Humiliate you?" She seemed genuinely surprised. "David, darling, I did nothing but tell the truth. If the truth is humiliating, maybe the problem isn't with me." Carlos Drummond approached with his social predator's smile. "Liz, May I have a statement for my column? Of course, Carlos. She turned to him with the grace of an experienced actress. You can say that I'm starting a new chapter in my life. Sometimes when a door closes, we realize that it was actually locking us in a place that was too small for our dreams. And future plans? I'm moving to Paris next week. I have some interesting projects waiting for me there. Paris. The word fell on David like a final sentence. Liz wasn't just divorcing him. She was literally fleeing the country, putting an ocean between them. Chloe, attempting a last desperate move, said, "Well, at least now David and I can be happy together without secrets or lies." Liz looked at her with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Oh, my sweet, naive darling," she said, her voice filled with an almost maternal condescension. "Do you really think a man who betrayed his wife with you won't betray you with someone else?" The truth of the statement hit Chloe like a punch to the stomach. She looked at David for some sign of denial, some guarantee of future fidelity. Instead, she saw a man in total panic, more concerned about the financial implications of the divorce than about the feelings of either woman present. "David?" she whispered, a plea clear in her voice. He didn't reply. He couldn't reply, because deep down he knew Liz was right. And it was in that moment of absolute silence that Liz Jackson delivered the final blow. "Well," Liz said, adjusting the pearls at her neck with an elegant and definitive movement, "it's been a pleasure to clear all this up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to say goodbye to some dear friends before my trip." She turned to leave, but stopped as if she had remembered something important. "Oh, and Chloe?" The young woman looked up hopefully, perhaps believing that Liz would offer her some word of reconciliation or advice. "The red dress is beautiful on you, but for charity events, more sober colors are more appropriate. It's a matter of social etiquette." The final critique was delivered with such elegance that even the most experienced observers needed a few seconds to fully process the brutality of the comment. Liz had just given a lesson in etiquette in the middle of a public humiliation, definitively establishing the social hierarchy between them. Chloe stood still, paralyzed by shame, while Liz gracefully walked away. David remained by her side, but it was obvious to everyone that he was in a state of shock, still processing the speed with which his life had fallen apart. Carlos Drummond watched the scene with the sharp gaze of someone who had just witnessed the social story of the year. He was already mentally drafting the headline, "The Elegant Revenge," how Liz Jackson transformed humiliation into triumph at the most talked-about ball of the season. As Liz circulated the ballroom, saying goodbye to guests, every conversation reaffirmed her position as the true winner of the night. Elaine Carter hugged her warmly. "My love, you were masterful. I have never seen anyone maintain so much class in such a delicate situation. Thank you, Elaine. Sometimes elegance is the best revenge." Patricia Alvarenga joined the group. "Paris, how romantic. Do you have any specific plans there?" "As a matter of fact, I do." Liz's eyes shone with genuine enthusiasm. "I was invited to be an art consultant for a very prestigious gallery in the 6th arrondissement. And there are also other interesting possibilities." The mysterious smile on her face suggested there was much more to the story, but Liz was not inclined to give details. She would let others' imaginations fill in the blanks. Across the ballroom, Chloe finally began to move, like a sleepwalker waking from a nightmare. She looked around and realized she had become the center of a very different kind of attention, not admiration, but pity mixed with malice. The whispers followed her every move. Poor girl, she didn't know what she was getting into. She thought she was going to make it into high society through the back door. David always had questionable taste in mistresses. Every comment was like a stab to her pride. Chloe had arrived at the ball believing she would be crowned the new queen. Instead, She was publicly unmasked as a naive and inadequate pretender. David tried to approach her. "Chloe, let's talk in private." "No!" She recoiled as if he were contagious. "Don't touch me! You lied about everything!" Tears began to stream down Chloe's perfect makeup, creating dark trails on her cheeks. The realization that she had just been one more in a long line of disposable women was devastating for someone who had always considered herself special. "Chloe, please, let me explain." David tried again, but his voice sounded desperate and unconvincing. "Explain what? That I'm the sixth? That I was never special? That you never had any intention of marrying me?" Her voice grew louder and louder, attracting even more stares. "I quit my job. I moved out of my apartment. I told my family I was going to marry an important businessman." The public confession of her naivete only deepened her humiliation. Some guests shook their heads with pity, while others exchanged "I told you so" glances, typical of high society when their predictions are confirmed. Julian Ford, the young heir who had flirted with her earlier, approached with a condescending smile. "Chloe, don't get so upset. David was always known for his temporary affairs. You shouldn't have gotten so attached." The observation, while intended to be comforting, only confirmed that all of society knew about David's reputation, except her. Chloe realized she had been the last to find out about her own relationship. Meanwhile, Liz continued her triumphant farewell tour. Every conversation revealed more details about her future plans, painting a picture of a woman who had not only escaped an unhappy marriage, but had meticulously planned her ascent to a better life. Dubois Gallery is one of the most respected in Paris, she told a group of art enthusiasts. They were impressed with my curatorial work on the Monet exhibition at the Art Gallery of Nice-Alpbau's last year. What she didn't mention, but what they would discover later through international gossip channels, was that Pierre Dubois, the gallery owner, was a 45-year-old aristocratic widower who had been enchanted not only by Liz's professional expertise, but also by her personal elegance. Margaret Wilson pulled Liz into a more secluded corner. "Darling, can I ask an indiscreet question? This move to Paris, is there someone waiting for you there?" Liz smiled with calculated mystery. "Let's just say there are interesting possibilities. A man who values intelligence as much as beauty, who understands that a woman can be a partner, not just an ornament. French, with that elegance that only the French possess." And she lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And with resources that make David's businesses look like a local market stall." Margaret laughed, delighted. "Darling, you are simply inspiring. To transform betrayal into liberation, humiliation into triumph. It's a work of art." Across the ballroom, David finally managed to calm Chloe down enough for a more private conversation. They moved to one of the club's smaller rooms, away from curious eyes. "Chloe, I know you must be confused, but we can get through this." "Get through this?" She looked at him in disbelief. "David, you made me look like an idiot for 8 months. You made me believe I was special, that I had a future with you. And you do. Now that Liz is asking for a divorce, we can finally be together officially. With what money?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You heard what she said. She's richer than you are. In the divorce, you could lose half of everything you own." The financial reality hit David like a slap. For years, he had assumed he controlled all the couple's finances. To discover that Liz not only had her own resources, but they were superior to his, was a devastating shock. "That can't be true," he mumbled. "The stocks, the real estate, they're just family heirlooms. Heirlooms that are worth more than your company." Chloe was beginning to see David as he really was. Not the successful, powerful businessman she had imagined, but a middle-aged man who had just discovered his wife was his most valuable asset, and he had lost her. At that moment, Carlos Drummond appeared at the room's door. "David, can I have a word for my column tomorrow?" "There's nothing to comment on," David replied curtly. "Oh, but there is. The most elegant wife in Sydney society announcing her move to Paris, one of the most civilized divorces I've ever witnessed, is a fascinating story." Carlos wasn't really asking for permission. He was informing them that the story would be published with or without David's cooperation. "And you, Chloe?" Carlos turned to her with journalistic interest. "Any comment on tonight's events?" Chloe looked at David, expecting him to defend her, to publicly declare his plans for a future together. Instead, he seemed to shrink even more, clearly unwilling to publicly commit to her after the night's disaster. The lack of support was the final straw. Chloe realized she had lost not only the battle against Liz, but also any chance of a future with David. He was too cowardly to defend her when she needed him, too weak to take responsibility for his own actions. "My only comment," she said, straightening her shoulders with newfound dignity, "is that some life lessons are just too expensive to be worth it." With those words, Chloe left the room, leaving David alone with Carlos Drummond and the weight of his own decisions. 3 years later. Paris. The apartment in the chic 6th arrondissement had a view of the Eiffel Tower and was decorated with a perfect combination of French elegance and Australian sophistication. Liz Jackson, now Liz Dubois, was sitting on the terrace, drinking her morning coffee while watching her 2-year-old twins, Henry and Beatrice, play in the private garden. Pierre Dubois entered the terrace carrying a tray with fresh croissants and the morning newspaper. "Mon amour," he said, gently kissing Liz's forehead. "There's an interesting article here about Australia." Liz smiled, accepting the coffee cup he offered her. At 38, she radiated a happiness she had never experienced during her 15 years of marriage to David. Pierre wasn't just a better husband. He was a true partner, someone who respected her intelligence and ambition as much as he admired her beauty. "What kind of article?" "About business bankruptcies. It seems a construction company called Miller Ventures went under last month." Liz raised an eyebrow with interest. "David?" "Apparently. The article mentions financial mismanagement and lawsuits. The owner, David Miller, is being investigated for fiscal irregularities." Liz felt no pleasure in the news. That phase of her life was completely over. But there was a certain poetic justice in the fact that David, who had always considered himself her financial superior, had lost everything due to his own incompetence. "And the young woman who was with him that night at the Imperial Club?" asked Pierre, who knew the whole story. "Chloe?" Liz thought for a moment. "I heard she married a dentist in the Gold Coast. She apparently learned her lesson about not betting on losing horses." Pierre laughed, a rich and warm sound that echoed across the terrace. "You are terrible, ma chérie, but justice poétique, as we say." Henry ran to the table, speaking an adorable mix of English and French. "Maman, look, I found a flower for you." Liz picked up her son, accepting the small daisy he had picked from the garden. Beatrice soon joined them, demanding equal attention. "Mes petits trésors," Pierre murmured, watching the scene with obvious adoration. This was the life Liz had built for herself, not as revenge against David, but as a reward for her own courage. She had transformed betrayal into liberation, humiliation into opportunity, an end into a beginning. The Dubois Gallery had become one of the most prestigious in Paris under her curatorship, and she was expecting her third child, a girl they would name Sophia, in honor of the grandmother who had left her the inheritance that made her independence possible. As she watched the children play in the Parisian garden, Liz reflected on that night at the Imperial Club 3 years ago. She had planned every detail of that public humiliation, But she now realized that the real victory hadn't been in destroying David and Chloe that night. The real victory was this: a life built on her own terms, with a man who loved her completely, children who filled her heart, and a career that fulfilled her soul. In the end, Liz Jackson had discovered that the best revenge is not the destruction of your enemies, but the construction of a life so spectacular that it makes everything they did to try and diminish you irrelevant.